Okay, are we on? We are on. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Goldstein. I'm a partner at Fenwick & West. I lead our corporate venture practice, where we have the good fortune of representing dozens of leading CVC units in the United States and globally, including many of the speakers you'll hear from today and tomorrow. So we have a great panel of very experienced leaders of CVC units here to talk about managing and accelerating their CVC units and their mission through disruptive changes. In this case, the disruptive change being leadership changes in their organization, particularly CEO leadership changes. So we have to my immediate left, Bill Taranto, who's the president of Merck Global Health Innovation Fund. To his left, Michelle McCartney, who's the managing director of Verizon Ventures. And to my far left, Quinn Lee, who's the senior vice president and head of Qualcomm Ventures. So first, let me ask, starting with Bill, just introduce yourself a little bit more, give a little context for yourself, and sort of the history of Merck Global Health Innovation Fund.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Taranto, and I'm president of the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund. Merck has two different funds: a traditional life science fund, and then our fund, which is a $500 million evergreen fund that's 100% dedicated to digital health and technology and healthcare. We started the fund in 2010, so we've been around going on into our 13th year of investing. We primarily focus on growth investing. We'll do a A and B round occasionally, but we don't do any startup or seed capital. And today we're probably one of the largest, I would say, digital health investors in the world. We probably deploy close to $100 million a year, and we certainly have evergreened the fund a number of times and pulling that kind of capital back into the fund to keep ourselves going.
Michelle, little history on yourself and Verizon?
Yes. So I'm one of the managing directors at Verizon Ventures. I'm actually now the longest serving team member, which is hard to believe at 10 years. The fund has actually been around since 2004, but it started off as sort of one investment professional, gradually grew, and to now we've actually got a dozen professionals on our team spread between New York and New Jersey, Palo Alto, San Francisco, and part of our team is in Tel Aviv. So the fund has been around, like I said, since 2004. We invest strategically, for sure, along the lines of the priority growth areas of the company. Obviously, that goes hand in hand with being financial as well. If it's not financial, it's not strategic. But typically, sort of from a stage perspective, usually in the Series A, Series B is when we typically play. And it's oriented toward hopefully establishing partnerships over time.
Mm-hmm. Quinn?
Hi, I'm Quinn. I head up Qualcomm Ventures. So I've been with the company for 17 years. The venture group was started back in 2000, so we've been in existence for 22 years. So we manage a pretty large portfolio globally right now. It's about 150 active companies, a little over $2 billion under management. And we have a team of 30 people in 6 different regions around the world. So we invest globally in areas that are strategically relevant to Qualcomm's business. So we invest in areas like 5G, similar probably to Verizon, AI, automotive, IoT, enterprise. So in companies that we can partner with, either as customers or business partners in our ecosystem.
Great. So, a ton of experience, right, and sort of long-standing venture funds. So maybe I'll start with Michelle and just say, describe the one or two sort of major leadership changes that Verizon Ventures had to sort of manage its way through over the course of your tenure at Verizon.
Yeah. So during the tenure of the program since 2004, we've gone through 2 CEO changes. I would say the first was in 2011, and it was not as impactful because to the ventures team. At that point, it was a team of 2, so it was still fairly small organization. It was just sort of an offshoot of the corporate development team at that point. Fast forward, though, to our next CEO change in 2018, and it was actually much more impactful and all-encompassing because not only did we switch CEOs of the company, that coincided with, at the same time, switching to a new head of corporate development and ventures, Chris Bartlett, who came from outside, was in investment banking. And at the same time, or with short succession there, was also followed by a complete reorganization of the business unit structure for Verizon to reflect the new vision of the CEO incoming, as well as just where the market was headed and what had shifted within Verizon. So we had a complete change over in terms of immediate leadership, top leadership, and also how was the business structured.
Yeah. Quinn, how your experience over your tenure at Qualcomm?
Yeah, so the group's gone through 3 CEO changes. I've experienced 2, and I would say to a large extent, our CEO transition was all CEOs that been with the company for a long time, so we have certain levels of relationships with. So none of the CEO changes, I would say, had a huge impact on how we kind of operated overall, although the groups have changed the reporting structure, right? We were at one point reporting to our CTO at one point, and then when I took over the group, that was 2016, we brought in a person from externally who was EVP of strategy and MA, so the group got moved under him. And then with the recent CEO transition, we moved under our CFO. So, but overall, I would say, other than those movements in terms of reporting structure, the operation of the group has stayed mostly, I would say, intact. We've obviously fine-tuned things over time and so forth, but.
Yep. And Bill, I think you might hold the world record for leadership changes above Merck Global Health Innovation Fund.
Yeah, so we're starting our 13th year. I'm on my 3rd CEO, but I've had 10 direct bosses in the first full 12 years, which is quite a bit of change. I think, but much like Quinn, I'm obviously governed by a board as well, and that's the real governance. So the leadership change in and of itself didn't really affect us. We've always had a tremendous amount of support from Merck, but it does require some certain skill sets, which I think we'll get into, of why we've been successful with those leadership changes, because it does cause churn, regardless of what anybody thinks, because each new leader, whether it's the CEO or even a direct boss, who then joins our board, and then we've had changes in our board as well, they all have a viewpoint of what the fund should or shouldn't be, how it can help impact the broader Merck enterprise. And that causes, a lot of angst and issues around how then do we function going forward when we have that leadership change. But I think, we've proven we can be successful. And again, I think we'll get into it, regardless of the leadership changes that have occurred at Merck.
Yeah. So Bill, keep going with that, because I'm curious. Like, what do you sort of think are the sort of foundational principles or sort of structural elements that you put in place at the beginning of forming sort of the innovation fund that helped sort of sustain it through those various changes?
I think the biggest thing we did, I think the primary reason we've been so successful over these years, we were extremely thoughtful when we started the fund around what is our investment thesis and strategy, and then what's our execution strategy. And I counsel many corporate funds to really think that through and really come up with how you're going to invest and then how you're going to execute against it. For us, as a healthcare investor, and you've heard me talk before, our 2 primary investment theses that we think data is the currency we're going to use to transact in the future healthcare market. So we want our company to be data companies. And then we don't believe point solutions work within healthcare. We want to work in an integrated healthcare solution. So that's our basic investment strategy. And then our execution strategy is we do something called ecosystem investing, where there's no single answer in healthcare that solves 100% of a problem. So we start with an anchor tenant that maybe solves 60% of the problem, and then we identify the gaps and we invest around it. And our goal is to mix and match those companies together over time to create an integrated solution. But why is that strategy important, the execution strategy? Because it's allowed us to articulate in a pretty concise manner to any leadership change that no matter what your vision is, the foundation of our execution and investment thesis hasn't changed one bit in the 12 years. It's identical from the day we started, and we have the ability then to articulate that across the enterprise, that no matter what you believe your vision is, we actually can execute against it because we have a very sound strategy. That's one of the primary things I would just say to any corporate, is really make sure that you've been thoughtful. Because if I just said to you, I just invest in digital health, that's not a strategy, right? And I hear a lot of corporate funds, talk in those type of terms, but if you can articulate exactly what your investment thesis is and what your your execution strategy, I think you can be successful. I think that's probably the primary thing. There's some other structural things we did.
Yeah. So Michelle, I'm curious, your experience at Verizon, is it sort of more akin to Bill's? We have sort of a consistent strategy and it sort of lasted us through the different CEO changes, or is it for Verizon a strategy that you might have had to sort of pivot and change to adapt to the priorities of a CEO in a restructured company?
It's probably a little bit of both, if I'm honest. I mean, we've had a consistent approach throughout, and I think for sure helping through the changes has been well-established reputation and relationships within the company and throughout the business. So despite the fact that shuffled around, we used to be split wireline, wireless, now it's customer focused instead. It's the same, you've been working with the same individuals and it's the same technology at the end of the day and the same core objectives. I mean, Verizon is, known for its, its world-class building and maintaining of networks. Mm-hmm. And we help to bring that innovation layer on top of that, and that's been consistent throughout. I mean, yes, the technologies evolve over time of what's capable, what we can layer on top of it, but that has been a consistent goal. I will say I think there are preconceived notions that tend to come in with new leadership changes, and I think in that it's important to be able to, first of all, recognize the spotlight will be on you, make sure you don't screw up, but also just work through the skepticism, transform that to neutrality, and then into trust and advocacy. That's been sort of the model of making sure that it takes a little bit of time to bring everyone on board and make sure you're reestablishing what these new partnerships look like.
And Quinn, consistent strategy at Qualcomm, or have you had to sort of pivot and move a little bit more?
I would say we're probably similar to Bill. We have been fairly consistent since the beginning. When the program was established, the goal was really to, at the time, Qualcomm's business model was changing. At one point, we were in infrastructure, we were in handset, we were also developing technology. We actually exited the handset business, the infrastructure business. We became a sole technology provider in the industry. So there's a recognition that we need to invest in other parts of the value chain to help drive the adoption of the technology and our ecosystem. So that's the premises of where the groups have started. And since then, I think that premise still holds today. So we want to invest in customers, potential customers, business partners to help us grow our overall ecosystem. And from an operation standpoint, I think for us it's very simple. Two primary objectives, right? One is we want to make good investment because that's the only hard metric you can measure. And also successful companies, they can drive strategic benefits, right? If its company not succeed, very hard to gather any benefits. So that's number one. Number two is we think really hard about how do we bring strategic value back to the corporation, whether it's through market insights, the partnership we can drive between the startups and the parent company. How do we add value basically to Qualcomm, right? So those are the two primary objectives that the team works under. And that hasn't really changed over time.
Yeah. So Michelle, I'm curious, like in your experience, what was the most challenging thing about managing through leadership change, and how did you sort of, what decisions did you make that really helped Verizon Ventures sort of like work their way through and continue to be, strategically valuable to the organization?
Yeah. So actually, first I'm gonna echo what Quinn said.
Yeah.
I do think that you hit on some key points that absolutely ring true for what we've done as well, which is how we approach what we bring. The value that we're bringing to the business has not changed. I mean, yes, there can be some nuances of what areas folks are really finding as a need that they want to sort of focus on for specific investment segments. But the overall approach of what we bring to the table has not changed, and that's really important. And I will say, working through the change, I mean, I think sitting down and partnering has been just critical. I mean, having folks on the other side recognize what we bring to the table, make sure that we're coming to a common approach. Challenges is what you'd wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Look, it's challenging when there's so much change at one time. So I will say that, there was a short period of time where we were much more focused inwardly than externally. And I think we just had to work through that. I think it made us better and stronger at the end of the day. It actually created some opportunities to rethink, what was our regular day-to-day interaction looking like? How could we increase our impact? I think it doesn't hurt to step back sometimes, and even though you're a long-standing, established group with regular processes, it's good to step back and say, what could we do just a little bit better? So I think we used it as an opportunity.
Yeah. Quinn, any particular challenges you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so with any changes, at the leadership level, obviously there's two aspects to it. Well, one is the team, if you will. They get, nervous, right? What does it mean to our charter? Is the business going to be as usual? So you gotta, I guess, give enough to team the comfort so they don't run away, and work with you trying to continue to run the business. And I would say the other thing is, as we got moved under different groups, when we were reporting under our CTO, we had a broader investment scope, and we did not work with the business unit as closely. Once we moved under this new person that brought in, I recognized that, the more closer we are working with the business unit, I think the more relevant we can stay with the company and the more value we can add to the corporation, right? Now, it doesn't have to be all investment related, just even insights we can bring to the company, to the business unit. We host these events where we bring a bunch of startups in. It doesn't have to be portfolio companies. Right. 10 or 20, let's say, AI-related startups. Yep. As an educational session to the broader team, both engineering and business, see what's innovation that's out there, right? So I think the shift that we had over time was the closer engagement we have with the BUs and get the general managers of the business unit get involved in our investment kind of process, if you will.
Yeah. And Bill, your experience, I'm curious, challenges that you faced in particular for all the different leadership changes that you went through, but also sort of picking up on the points that Michelle and Quinn just raised about how to keep your business units, the sort of people that you report to, sort of focused externally, just as much as sort of, they need to sort of be thinking internally.
I think inevitably what happens with leadership changes, and they've echoed it already, is that, people, if you go back to the original, like when we started our fund, our actual remit was to put Merck in new healthcare businesses that would drive revenue and EPS. Merck wanted to actually be a healthcare company. In 2016, they decided to switch to be a biotech company, and that then changes the focus. We were, heavy infrastructure. There was a middle period where we were heavy HIT infrastructure investing because that's where Merck wanted us to go. Now today we're heavily supporting Merck research labs and drug discovery and R&D. And so those changes, you have to be quite nimble but that's what happens. It's their imprint that they want to put on the company, and your fund has to adapt to that. I think the big lesson we learned, and Quinn alluded to it, is what we've done a really good job in the last 5 or 6 years is communicating with the organization, listening. We started something called enterprise coverage, which allows us to go to every part of the organization. We call it use case, but listen to their problems. That's what a use case is. What are you trying to solve, Merck? And is there a way for us to use venture capital as a way to solve those problems? So one of the lessons for us that we learned was, I would say at the very beginning of the fund, we only communicated up, but we learned that we have to, to be a really successful fund, we had to communicate better with the organization and really try to be more of a partner and understand what they were doing. And then that would make the leadership changes easier because we were already integrated into the wider enterprise about understanding what the general needs are, because those won't change with leadership, right? It's, most corporates have the same issues regardless of what leadership change happens, and if you're there to support that, then I think you have a lot more chance of being a success. But I think that's one of the key things we do is communicate much better across the enterprise, which we do today than we did at the very beginning.
Yeah. So how do you, in communicating across the enterprise, do you face any friction or resistance from, people who, might be in other business units who might want to be sort of focusing more of the budget internally as opposed to sort of externally? And might there be sort of competitive elements towards what you're investing in, either from a budget standpoint or actually directly competitive, that are particular challenges?
So the uniqueness of our fund is that we don't need a champion. We don't need any business support to do an investment. We do like to do something we call partner invest, where we have a commercial agreement associated with an investment. But we're fully funded venture fund, so we have our own capital. And where that sort of differentiates us from the organization is, obviously the rest of the organization works off an expense, right? And they only have limited budgets. And we can't do everything for the entire organization. We also, even though we're pretty flush with capital, we're also limited in what we can do. We can't solve every use case that Merck wants to solve. So we try to think of the ones that are the more go across the entire enterprise and maybe something for a very specific part of the organization. Because if we do that, then it's too small, too unique, and it's probably something that we can't scale as a business. That's one of the problems with healthcare. It's so complex. Scaling a business is very difficult. So if we focus on something really small that doesn't have an enterprise-wide view of Merck and then an enterprise-wide view of the industry, whether it's other pharmas or broadly healthcare, whether it's about patients or providers, we have to think more bigger than that. And I think for the most part, the business units understand that. They do want to look externally, but they have their own problems that they need to solve with their own budgets for some of the internal things that they're working on that we don't get involved with.
Yeah. Michelle, how about you? Any particular challenges in communicating across the different divisions of Verizon and getting them to think about the value that the ventures team is trying to bring by focusing externally as opposed to spending more time focusing on what a particular business unit might want to focus on?
I would say in general not. I mean, there is broad support, and I think, we too have had, we have a history of having events where we also bring in startups and, again, not just our portfolio companies. I think those kinds of educational discussions, when you can expose your leadership team and your business units to external innovation that may be further out than what they've been focused on for their, this quarter, next quarter, try to, move the discussion to further. I think you build, it's about these internal relationships that you build and recognizing, who's bringing what to the table. So it's been a very productive relationship. I will say sometimes I think there's a little bit of tension over our objective in investing in things that we think are truly strategic and not only for a single, simple commercial relationship. I think sometimes the business unit is in favor of, oh, here's a startup that we're working with, we've signed a contract, and they're raising funds. Do you want to invest? And I think sometimes there's a little bit of what can be a hard discussion around. Well, what we're really trying to do are invest in technologies that are more forward-looking, where we think that an investment actually brings something extra beyond just a single, simple commercial relationship, and perhaps a platform play that might have more applicability. I think those are the discussions sometimes that take place.
And how about you, Quinn? Any friction points, challenges?
Always challenges. So I think one of the things we have done, I think, reasonably well is, to Michelle just mentioned, is building the partnership with the BUs, right? Mm-hmm. So the general managers of the business unit tends to be, they have to focus on their business, but they're also more strategic. They're thinking about what their business might look like 3 to 5 years from now. So we build relationship with these general managers, almost serve as their consultant in some ways. So if they have a problem, they may even call us, say, what do you guys think, right? It may not be related to a particular investment. So once you have that kind of relationship with the business units, then we bring up investment opportunities. Then they understand, okay, why you're doing it. And as long as it doesn't conflict with the BUs, and we don't need any strategic or business commercial agreement in place before we invest, ultimately the investment P&L I own, right? And they understand if the investment doesn't go well, it's not on their shoulders, it's not mine. And so there's benefits to them. Some could be bigger, some could be smaller, but ultimately I own the P&L for the investment, right? So as long as you build that trusted relationship with the general managers, in general, they're very supportive of what we do and often call us for advice on different things.
Got it. So I'm curious from each of you, as we sort of head into a little bit more of a turbulent time in the venture community, right? And regardless of whether, no sort of predictions on whether there will be any leadership changes for any of you, hopefully not. But curious your thoughts about managing up in this kind of environment when there will be sort of a closer view on budget spend and what we're doing strategically? Like, how do you sort of navigate that and sort of manage the CEO and the leadership above you to keep the venture program moving forward, which is obviously a much longer term horizon than quarter to quarter? Michelle, you want to take that first?
I mean, I'd say, look, leadership understands that innovation is critical to the future of the company. I mean, you can't get sucked into a cycle of, oh, we have to stop everything right now. You just can't. You have to build for what's the next big thing that's going to come. And from a financial perspective, look, we absolutely more than pay for ourselves, right? But at the end of the day, I think most CVCs, we don't exist. We're a rounding error in the company's financials. Our returns can be fabulous, but they're not going to move the needle for Verizon's financial returns. It really comes down to strategic impact, and I think that carries across the board in any economic situation.
Yep. Quinn?
Yeah, I would say I echo many of the points that Michelle mentioned. I think the financial return is important, but it doesn't move needles for the corporation, right? So at the end of the day, we got to make a strategic impact. And the other thing I think that's served us well over time is we're very disciplined in our investment approach. So we've gone through up and down cycles. So you got to, last year was a tough year because everything's getting priced up and you got to do deals very, very fast. So things are becoming, I would say, much better overall environment, you have more time, as Bill talked about, to think about deals. You don't have to rush into investment opportunities. So we're very disciplined. We take a thesis-driven approach. And I think that discipline in terms of how we approach investing has served us well over time from delivered return perspective, as well as adding value back to the corporation.
Yeah. Bill, thoughts on tips for people to be thinking about as we head into a little bit of a choppy water here?
Yeah, we're obviously the same, financial returns and strategic impact. But I agree with Quinn. I think one of the things that you have to teach the parent, especially in turbulent times, is discipline and patience. And discipline is, one of the things that they sometimes understand, well, why are you doing a follow-on investment in a company that may not seem like it's that great of a company? And that's that patience thing, that you have to play the long game, not that's typically the problem with the parent is they want everything to happen overnight, and venture takes time. And certainly I can say in healthcare it takes a long time. And really teaching them discipline and patience, there's a method to our madness. And you hired us 12 years ago to do a job because we're experts in what we do, and we've proven over the 12 years that we're actually quite good at what we do. And let us do it this way, and we'll continue to communicate with you. But I think that's one of the key things is that discipline, have patience. You don't, in healthcare right now, one might think that, because of COVID, there was this boon in healthcare. In certain aspects there were, but if you've been paying attention, almost every SPAC in healthcare has failed. But then we look at it as if you're patient, then there's this whole thing we call a dented can opportunity that over time, they're good assets, they just were funded the wrong way. And if you wait a little bit and not rush into anything, you actually present yourself with wonderful opportunities to continue to invest and bring those strategic assets in. But you got to teach that up. That's one of the things they don't quite get about venture, in my experience, is the need for that discipline and patience.
Thank you. So I think we have a little less than 2 minutes. I'll pause and just sort of see if there are any specific questions that anyone has out. No questions. All right, we will not take any questions then. All right, Christina said no. So I welcome sort of each of the panelists to just give some final thoughts on suggestions and tips for the audience. A ton of experience here on the panel. Like, what would you sort of say are the 1 or 2 priorities that everyone should be thinking about as they sort of move forward and drive their CVC units into the times ahead? Bill?
Well, I think, some of the things I mentioned for us, I still think if you have a really good investment thesis and strategy, that's the foundation of which allows you then to do the next thing, which is you really got to communicate. And again, one of the lessons for us was learning to communicate more across the enterprise versus just above us, and get more people involved in thinking about our fund, what does our fund do, and what the fund can do for the company. Like I said, there was that's the great thing about this job. You're always learning. No matter how much experience you have, you just continue to grow and learn. And if you listen, and then finally, like I said before, you got to have a lot of discipline and patience to be in corporate venture. But you've got to teach that that message across the organization.
Yep. Michelle, final suggestions?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd echo a lot of what you said. It all rings true, I'll tell you. We have a lot of similarities here on this panel, but so I think stakeholdering is just critical to our success. I think it helps us understand when and where to add value, when to make the right connections, and really demonstrates the value add both to our portfolio companies and to the company.
Yeah. Quinn, wrap it up.
All right. So I think echo one comment Bill made earlier. It was the clear strategy. If you're setting up a new program, what are you looking to do? So set that to be very, very clear and obviously communicate to the key stakeholders. And then the other one I think has served us well, as I mentioned before, is just be disciplined about your approach, right? Whether it's uptime, downtimes, you just got to be consistent, have a long time horizon view, and be very disciplined how you approach investing. So.
Super. Well, thank you, Quinn, Michelle, and Bill.
Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.